Hey guys, this is Charles Yeager with Shutterstock. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over why you need lens filters for your drone. Alright guys, so in this tutorial, we're going to go over ND filters and polarizer filters for your drone. I'm going to go over the pros and cons of each of those, and we're also going to look at some real-world example footage and see if we can spot the differences. Now I'm going to be flying the DJI Mavic 2 Pro, and the filters I'm going to be using are the Polar Pro Cinema series. That set includes 6 different filters, 3 of which are ND filters, and 3 others are ND filters with polarizers. Alright guys, if you're ready, let's go ahead and head out and test these filters. Alright guys, right here in the Ozark Mountains, nice sunny day. Got this stream over here. It's gonna be a good place to test out the ND and the polarizer filters. Before we get started though, let me explain a little bit more about what each filter does. The ND filters, the ones that just look like black glass, they cut down the amount of light entering the camera, which might seem a little odd considering we typically want more light, but with the drone flying out in bright daylight, it's often very difficult to abide by the 180-degree shutter rule, which basically means our shutter speed is set to double our frame rate in order to get natural looking motion blur. The problem is that most drones have a fixed aperture at 2.8, so if I'm filming at 30 frames per second and I set the shutter speed to 1/60th, everything is overexposed, which means I have to crank up the shutter speed really high to 500 or 1000 to get proper exposure. This can cause the image to stutter because of the lack of motion blur. Now some drones do have an adjustable aperture like the Mavic 2 Pro, and this will also help you control the exposure. However, the lens on the drone will be at its sharpest at an f-stop of 4 to 5.6, which is still fairly open, and that's also going to lead to overexposure without an ND filter. So an ND filter essentially cuts down the amount of light entering the camera, which will allow you to film at a proper shutter speed without the image becoming overexposed. The result is more natural looking motion blur and is more in line with cinematic imagery. Of course, you can always add in motion blur in post with a program like After Effects if you do film at a high shutter speed. That's going to add a lot more render time and the results can have artifacts and occasionally still have some stuttering. So it just makes more sense to capture the preferred motion blur in camera if possible. Another great use for ND filters is to do long exposures with photos. You can see on this example of the stream, this first photo was taken at a fast shutter speed, which you would typically have to do if you don't have an ND filter. Now the second photo was taken at a slower shutter speed, I believe it was a ½ second, and you can see how it kind of blends the water's movement there. Now really the only con for ND filters is they usually will introduce a little bit of color shift on your image. Depending on the quality of your filter will depend on how much color is shifted. Most filters will have either a blue or a yellow tint, but some lower quality filters may even shift into purple color tones. In my case, with the Polar Pro Cinema series, the ND added a subtle bit of yellow tone, and I found that if I just offset the temperature using Lumetri Color by about 10, it corrected that color shift. Next, we have polarized ND filters, which reduce reflections and glare, often resulting in more saturated colors, typically with the blues and the greens. Circular polarizers feature a circular filter that can be rotated to adjust the amount of polarized light passing through the lens and entering the camera. Here's a controlled example to demonstrate the effect. Look at the reflection visible on the tablet. Now as I rotate the polarizer, you can see it filters out most of the reflected light. The yellow countertop also looks more saturated as well. Polarized filters can also allow for more visible detail in clouds and reduced haze over long distance landscapes. You can see on this cloud example, here's a shot without a polarizer. And here's the same shot with the polarizer filter. We get more detail in the clouds and a darker blue sky. To me, if I compare footage shot with the polarizer and without, it almost gives it the appearance as if it has an extra stop of dynamic range, retaining that detail in the brighter parts of the sky. You can really notice this at the horizon line. Some cons for polarizers would be similar to ND filters. They reduce the amount of light entering the camera, so they're not ideal to use in low light aerial situations. Another con would be that unlike on a normal camera, it can take some time to dial in the polarizer on a drone. This is because you're probably going to have to set the polarizer, then fly the drone up to check the effect, and then return the drone and adjust the polarizer if needed. But once you get it dialed in, you can pretty much set it and forget it, and some polarizers will have an indicator that marks the strongest linear polarization angle. You can see that indicator here on the Polar Pro filter.
All right guys, hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial checking out ND filters and polarizers for your drone. If you want to know more, make sure you check out the blog post for this tutorial over on Shutterstock. I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm out of gas though, so